Don't move. On your knees now. You don't belong here!
I live here. I'm Commander Darnell Sutton, U.S. Navy.
Yeah, sure you are! Everybody's something around here!
My military ID is in my pocket. You can verify it.
People always got a story. Always think the rules don't apply.
At 6:14 a.m., on a quiet suburban street in Virginia Beach, 5 federal agents, with weapons drawn, threw a decorated black Navy SEAL face first onto his own driveway. The man was Commander Darnell Sutton, 43 years old, a 1-year Special Operations veteran with 5 combat deployments, a Silver Star, and a service record most people would never be cleared to read. He had been loading his truck in workout clothes, heading to base for a pre-deployment briefing. The agents who put their hands on him had no warrant, no probable cause, and the wrong address. But the moment they saw a muscular black man standing outside a nice house in a predominantly white neighborhood, they decided he was their target. What followed over the next 22 minutes was captured on 4 separate civilian cameras: the unlawful detention, the warrantless search, the racial slurs spoken just low enough to think no one would hear. And when the truth about who Darnell Sutton really was reached the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, and eventually the floor of the United States Senate, the agents who had treated his driveway like a combat zone would learn that they had just made the worst mistake of their careers. Every badge, every pension, every shred of authority they once carried would be stripped away, and the federal government would pay millions for what 5 men did to one family on a Sunday morning before sunrise. Senior Agent Russell Briggs was 46 years old and had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for nearly 18 years. Inside the agency, he was known as a hard charger, a label that in his case meant aggressive raids, inflated arrest numbers, and a pattern of targeting Black and Latino neighborhoods using intelligence so thin it barely qualified as guesswork. 11 formal complaints had been filed against him over 9 years. Excessive force, racial slurs during operations, fabricating probable cause to justify entries that never should have happened. Every single complaint had been buried by supervisors who valued his statistics more than the civil rights of the people he terrorized. His partner that morning was Agent Nolan Fitch, 33, 6 years on the job, and not once in those 6 years had Fitch filed a report that contradicted anything Briggs said or did. He followed orders. He signed paperwork. He looked the other way. 3 additional agents rounded out the team: Agent Lena Driscoll, Agent Sam Kowalski, and Agent Braddock, all 3 junior, all 3 trained under Briggs, all 3 conditioned to execute without question. The night before, Briggs had been briefed on a fugitive immigration target supposedly living on Sutton's Street. The actual address was 3 houses down. The suspect was a 26-year-old Hispanic male, 5'7", 140 pounds. Darnell Sutton was 6'2", 220 pounds, 43 years old, and black. Nothing about him matched the description. Nothing about the address matched the briefing. But Briggs never verified. He never cross-checked. He pulled up, saw a black man outside a house that looked too nice for his assumptions, and made his own decision. That decision would cost him his badge, his freedom, and every ounce of authority he ever thought he had. Briggs moved fast across the driveway, his weapon raised, his voice cutting through the quiet morning air like a siren. "On the ground! Hands where I can see them! Don't move!" The commands came rapid and overlapping, designed not to communicate but to overwhelm. Sutton didn't flinch. 21 years of special operations training had conditioned him to stay calm when every instinct screamed otherwise. He had been in rooms where a single wrong breath meant death. A man shouting on his own driveway was not going to break that discipline. He dropped to his knees slowly, hands raised, palms open and facing outward. His voice was steady. "I'm Commander Darnell Sutton, United States Navy. I live here. My military ID is in my back pocket." Briggs didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the words, didn't reach for the ID. "Shut your mouth. We'll figure out who you are." Fitch moved in from the left and grabbed Sutton's arm, wrenching it behind his back with more force than any compliant person required. Driscoll positioned herself 5 feet away, weapon trained on Sutton's center mass as if he were a barricaded fugitive and not a man kneeling on his own property in gym shorts. Kowalski stood near the truck, hand on his holster, watching the street. Doors were opening. The neighborhood was waking up to the sound of federal agents screaming at one of their own. Across the street, a retired white couple, Frank and Diane Parker, stepped onto their porch. Frank raised his phone and began recording. Diane did the same from a different angle. Next door, a screen door slammed open and a man stepped out. Cal Engstrom, 50 years old, retired Marine Staff Sergeant, Sutton's neighbor for 6 years. His voice carried down the driveway. "That's Commander Sutton. He's Navy. What the hell are you doing?" Briggs turned his head just long enough to locate the voice. "Get back inside your house right now, or I will arrest you for obstruction of a federal operation." Engstrom didn't move. He stood on his porch with his arms at his sides and repeated himself. "That man is a Navy SEAL commander. He lives here. I've known him for 6 years. Briggs ignored him and keyed his radio. "This is Briggs, requesting additional units to my location. We have a hostile crowd forming." There was no hostile crowd. There were 4 neighbors standing quietly on their lawns in bathrobes and slippers, watching in disbelief as a black man was held at gunpoint on his own concrete. Sutton, face pressed against the driveway, spoke again. His tone had not changed. It carried the same measured control he used in mission briefings and under enemy fire. "Sir, I am an active-duty Navy SEAL. You can verify this in 30 seconds. My commanding officer is Captain Ronan Ashford at Naval Special Warfare Command. Please call him." Briggs crouched down beside him. He leaned close, lowering his voice to something he clearly believed only Sutton would hear. "I don't care if you're the president. You fit the description. You people always have a story." What Briggs did not know was that Frank Parker's phone, held steady from only 20 feet away, was recording video with crystal clear audio. Every word Briggs whispered carried across the still morning air and straight into the microphone. What Briggs also did not know was that Cal Engstrom had opened Facebook Live on his phone 30 seconds earlier. Hundreds of people were already watching. Briggs stood and gave the order, "Cuff him." Fitch pulled Sutton's wrists together and ratcheted the handcuffs down. Too tight, deliberately tight. The metal bit into skin. Within seconds, thin lines of blood appeared on both wrists. Sutton did not resist, did not raise his voice. He said only 5 words. "This is being recorded, sir." The front door opened at 6:21 a.m. Dr. Vanessa Sutton, 40, a trauma surgeon at Centera Norfolk General Hospital, stepped onto the porch in a robe and bare feet. She had heard the shouting from the bedroom. Nothing in her years of surgical training prepared her for what she saw on her own driveway. Her husband was face down on the concrete, wrists cuffed behind his back, blood visible on both hands. 5 armed agents stood over him. Vanessa froze. Then she came down the steps slowly, hands raised and visible. "I'm his wife. We live here. What is happening?" Agent Driscoll closed the distance fast. "Stay back, ma'am." Her hand connected with Vanessa's shoulder and pushed. Vanessa stumbled backward, catching herself on the porch railing. Before she could speak again, 2 small figures appeared in the doorway. Elijah, 12, stood with his phone raised, recording, his face tight, jaw locked. Behind him, half hidden by the doorframe, was Naomi, 9. She was crying, not loud. The quiet, shaking kind that comes when a child sees something that breaks the version of the world they believed was safe. Briggs pointed at the children. "Get them inside!" Now, Vanessa positioned herself between the agents and her kids. "We own this house. My husband is active duty military. His ID is in his pocket. Please just look at it." Briggs cut her off. "Ma'am, if you interfere with this operation, I will arrest you too, and your children will go to protective services." Naomi's crying got louder. Elijah's phone did not move. 3 separate cameras from 3 separate angles captured the moment a federal agent threatened to take a Navy SEAL's children from their mother on her own front porch. That clip would later be played in a courtroom, on national television, and on the floor of the United States Senate. Cal Engstrom had not moved from his porch. He had not gone inside when Briggs threatened him with obstruction. He had not lowered his phone. He had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps, and he understood something Briggs clearly did not. You do not abandon your people when they are under fire. Engstrom pulled up a contact on his phone. He had the number for the Naval Special Warfare Command duty line because Sutton had given it to him years ago, the way military neighbors do. He pressed call. Lieutenant Commander Graves picked up on the second ring. Engstrom spoke fast but clearly. "This is Cal Engstrom, retired Staff Sergeant, USMC. There are 5 ICE agents on Commander Darnell Sutton's driveway right now. He is cuffed, face down, and bleeding. His wife has been pushed. His children are watching. They have no warrant." Within 90 seconds, Graves had verified Sutton's identity, his home address, and his active duty status. Engstrom walked across his yard onto the Sutton driveway, phone held out, speaker on. "This is Lieutenant Commander Graves, duty officer, Naval Special Warfare Command." The voice carried the weight of a command structure that dwarfed anything Briggs had ever operated under. "You are detaining an active duty Navy SEAL commander in his own driveway. Identify yourself immediately." For the first time that morning, Briggs hesitated. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked at Fitch. Fitch looked at the ground. Neither spoke. Meanwhile, across the street, Diane Parker had already texted the video to their son, a producer at a local television news station. The footage was already out of Briggs's control. He just didn't know it yet. Instead of releasing Sutton, Briggs doubled down. He turned to Fitch and Kowalski and ordered them to search the truck. No warrant, no consent, no probable cause. Fitch hesitated for half a second, then moved. Kowalski followed. They pulled open the driver's side door and began tearing through the vehicle. They rifled through the center console, the glove box, the back seat. They unzipped a Navy-issued deployment bag and dumped its contents onto the driveway. Then Fitch found the briefing folders. They were stamped, sealed, and clearly marked with classification headers that any federal employee should have recognized on sight. He opened them anyway. The pages inside contained operational details related to an upcoming special operations deployment. Details that no one without the appropriate security clearance had any legal right to see. Briggs had just created a national security breach on a suburban driveway in Virginia Beach. Kowalski pulled Sutton's military ID from a side pocket of the bag. He handed it to Briggs. Briggs looked at it for a long moment. The photograph matched, the rank matched, the name matched. Every single item they had pulled from that truck confirmed exactly who Darnell Sutton was. Fitch stepped close and whispered, "Russ, we need to stop." Briggs said nothing. He slid the military ID into his own vest pocket instead of returning it. Sutton, still face down on the concrete, turned his head slightly. His voice was calm and precise. "You just opened classified material without authorization. That is a federal crime." Briggs looked down at him. "Don't tell me what's a crime." 22 minutes after the SUVs had screeched to a stop, Briggs finally reached down and removed the handcuffs. He offered no apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that every piece of evidence his own team had uncovered proved Sutton was exactly who he said he was. Instead, Briggs leaned in close. "If you file a complaint, it'll be your word against 5 federal agents. Think about that." Sutton stood slowly. His wrists were raw, the skin broken in 2 places, blood dried in thin lines down both hands. His workout shorts were torn at the knee from being driven into concrete. He looked Briggs in the eye and spoke quietly. "Every second of this is on camera. Every word you said, every order you gave. You searched my vehicle without a warrant and opened classified documents." He paused. "I don't need to file a complaint. The United States Navy will file it for me." Briggs held the stare for a moment, then turned without a word. The 5 agents climbed back into their SUVs. The engines started. The vehicles pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. Sutton did not move from his driveway until they were gone. He stood there, bleeding, watching the road. Then Vanessa came to him. She reached for his hands and saw the cuts on his wrists. The children were still in the doorway. Naomi had stopped crying but had not moved. Elijah had lowered his phone but had not stopped recording. And for the first time that morning, Darnell Sutton's composure broke. Not for himself, not for the pain or the humiliation, But because his children had watched their father put face down on his own concrete by men with guns, and he had not been able to stop it, within 1 hour, the chain of command that Russell Briggs had never imagined reaching began to move. Captain Ronan Ashford, Sutton's commanding officer, was on a secure call with the Navy's Judge Advocate General's office before 7:30 a.m. NCIS was notified by 7:45. By 8:15, a formal referral had been transmitted to the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General's office, but it was the classified briefing folders that changed the scale of everything. The moment Briggs's team opened those documents on an unsecured driveway without clearance, the incident stopped being a civil rights matter and became a national security one. A mandatory counterintelligence review was triggered. The FBI was looped in. Secure channels that existed for wartime contingencies were now active over a suburban street in Virginia Beach. Ashford called Sutton personally that afternoon. His voice was direct. "Darnell, this isn't going to be swept under anything. I've already spoken to the Admiral. This goes all the way up." Sutton listened, said little, and thanked his commanding officer. That evening, the Parkers' Sun aired the driveway footage on the local news. The segment ran 4 minutes. By midnight, the video had 400,000 views online. By the following morning, it had crossed 2.3 million. Comment sections filled with outrage. News desks across the country picked up the story, and somewhere inside a federal building, Russell Briggs was writing a report that would only make things worse. Briggs filed his after-action report that same night. It stated that agents had responded to a confirmed address, encountered an uncooperative male who refused to identify himself, and that the detention was lawful and brief. Every word was a lie. Fitch co-signed without hesitation. Driscoll, Braddock, and Kowalski exchanged a look, but signed as well. They were nervous, but they were more afraid of Briggs than they were of the truth. The report landed on the desk of Deputy Director Howard Stanton, the ICE Field Office Supervisor. He received it at the same time he received the media coverage. 2 versions of the same morning, one written by his agents, one recorded by the world. Stanton chose his agents. He released a public statement saying the team had followed standard protocol and that the incident was under review. That statement aged less than 48 hours. DHS Inspector General investigators arrived with subpoenas. They wanted body camera footage, GPS data from both SUVs, the original operational briefing, and the complete personnel files of all 5 agents. The briefing clearly showed the target address was 3 houses down from Sutton's home. The GPS confirmed the SUVs had stopped directly in front of Sutton's driveway, and the body cameras, the devices designed to document exactly these kinds of encounters, had never been turned on. Briggs had told Fitch to hold off on activating them before they exited the vehicles. But it no longer mattered. 4 civilian cameras had captured everything. Every shout, every shove, every whispered word Briggs thought no one would hear. The joint investigation between NCIS and the DHS Inspector General's office began within days and expanded faster than anyone inside ICE had anticipated. Investigators pulled Briggs's complete personnel file, 11 formal complaints over 9 years, excessive force, racial slurs, fabricated probable cause. 2 of those complaints came from previous raids where black homeowners had been targeted at wrong addresses. In both cases, the homeowners had provided identification immediately. In both cases, Briggs had detained them anyway. Every complaint had been reviewed internally. Everyone had been dismissed. When investigators traced the dismissals, 4 of them led directly to the same name, Deputy Director Howard Stanton. The man who had stood behind a podium and told the press his agents followed standard protocol had personally buried nearly half the complaints filed against the agent who had just created a national incident. Then the emails surfaced. Investigators recovered an internal message Stanton had sent to a colleague 18 months earlier. The words were plain. Briggs gets numbers. That's what matters. A few complaints come with the territory. That single sentence would later be read aloud under oath in a congressional hearing. It would be printed in newspapers, quoted on cable news, and cited in a federal lawsuit. Meanwhile, the counterintelligence review reached its conclusion. The classified materials Briggs's team had opened on Sutton's driveway were SCI-level documents tied to an upcoming special operations deployment. Briggs held no security clearance at that level. None of his agents did. By opening those folders in an unsecured environment, they had potentially compromised an active military operation. The FBI opened a separate investigation into the breach. What had started as 5 agents pulling up to the wrong house was now a civil rights case, a criminal matter, and a national security incident running on 3 parallel tracks. The Sutton family retained Denise Chamberlain, a civil rights attorney and former Department of Justice prosecutor who had built her career on winning cases most lawyers considered unwinnable. She had taken on police departments, federal agencies, and municipal governments, and she had never lost a misconduct case that went to trial. After reviewing the evidence, she told the Suttons it was one of the most documented cases of federal abuse she had ever seen. The federal lawsuit was filed in the Eastern District of Virginia. It cited unlawful detention, excessive force, warrantless search and seizure, Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, intentional infliction of emotional distress, including the threat to remove the Sutton children, and a national security breach resulting from unauthorized access to classified material. The named defendants were Briggs, Fitch, Driscoll, Kowalski, Braddock Deputy Director Stanton, and the Department of Homeland Security. The complaint ran 94 pages. Attached as exhibits were all 4 civilian videos, the original operational briefing showing the correct target address 3 houses away, Briggs's false after-action report, Stanton's internal emails, and the classified document handling report from the counterintelligence review. But it was discovery that delivered the final blow. Chamberlain's team subpoenaed ICE operational records going back 2 years. They found that Briggs had been involved in 31 raids where agents arrived at the wrong address. In 27 of those raids, the wrongly targeted individuals were Black or Latino. The pattern was not an accident. It was not bad luck or sloppy paperwork. It was a practice, repeated and protected, that had finally been recorded by 4 cameras on a Sunday morning in Virginia Beach. The case reached the Senate Judiciary Committee on a Tuesday morning in Washington. Commander Darnell Sutton walked into the hearing room in full Navy dress uniform, ribbons aligned across his chest, posture straight, expression controlled. He took his seat before the microphone and recounted the morning of the raid the way he would deliver a mission debrief. Calm, precise, no embellishment. He described the SUVs arriving, the weapons drawn, the commands screamed before he could speak. He described kneeling on his own driveway with his hands raised, identifying himself clearly and being told to shut his mouth. He described the cuffs cutting into his wrists and the blood running down his hands. And then he described his 9-year-old daughter standing in the doorway, crying, while a federal agent pointed at her and told her mother that if she interfered, her children would be taken to protective services. The chamber went silent. Dr. Vanessa Sutton testified next. She spoke about what the raid had done to her children. Naomi had nightmares about men with guns coming to the house. She refused to sleep with her bedroom door closed. Elijah would not go outside before sunrise. He had stopped riding his bike in the driveway. Cal Engstrom, in a press suit he clearly did not wear often, testified about what he had witnessed from his porch. His voice was blunt and unwavering. Deputy Director Stanton was called next. He invoked the Fifth Amendment 14 times. Briggs was called after him. He did the same. Then a senator leaned into her microphone and read a single line from Stanton's internal email. Briggs gets numbers. That's what matters. A few complaints come with the territory. The clip trended nationally within hours. The indictments came down within weeks. Briggs was charged with federal civil rights violations, filing a false federal report, and unauthorized access to classified material. Fitch was charged with civil rights violations and filing a false report. Both men had signed documents they knew to be lies and participated in a detention they knew to be unlawful. Driscoll, Braddock, and Kowalski, facing the same charges, chose a different path. They cooperated with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges and provided testimony that confirmed 2 critical facts. First, that Briggs had ordered them not to activate their body cameras before exiting the vehicles. Second, that Briggs had seen the correct address on the operational briefing and chose to approach Sutton's house anyway. Stanton was indicted separately for obstruction and failure to report known patterns of misconduct. The man who had dismissed complaints, protected Briggs, and told the press his agents followed protocol now faced his own federal charges. All 5 agents were terminated. Stanton was forced to resign. The civil lawsuit brought by Denise Chamberlain on behalf of the Sutton family settled for $4.7 million, one of the largest individual ICE misconduct settlements in history. At sentencing, Briggs received 5 years in federal prison. Fitch received 2. Stanton received 18 months. The ICE field office was placed under a federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of all raid operations for the next 10 years. The careers that had been built on inflated numbers, buried complaints, and unchecked authority were finished, not because someone filed a report, because 4 civilians pressed record. Commander Darnell Sutton returned to duty. He deployed on schedule, the same briefing, the same mission, the same oath he had honored for 21 years. The raid did not stop him. The scars on his wrists healed. The ones on his family would take longer. Before he left, he spoke at a community event in Virginia Beach. He stood at a podium in civilian clothes, Cal Engstrom beside him, the same man who had refused to leave his porch when a federal agent told him to go inside. Sutton spoke without notes. "I've operated in war zones where the rules of engagement were stricter than what those agents followed in my driveway. My children watched their father treated like a criminal in his own home by people who swore an oath to protect this country." He paused. "I swore the same oath. The difference is, I meant it." The room was quiet for a long time before the applause came. The Sutton family used a portion of their settlement to establish a legal defense fund for military families and civilians targeted by unlawful federal raids. Within 6 months, the fund had taken on its first 12 cases. Denise Chamberlain joined the advisory board. The Parker's video, now viewed over 19 million times, was incorporated into a DHS-mandated training program on racial bias. Every new ICE agent in the country would watch the footage of a decorated Navy SEAL commander bleeding on his own driveway while his daughter cried in the doorway. Weeks after Sutton deployed, Vanessa shared a school essay Naomi had written for a class assignment about someone she admired. It was short. The handwriting was careful. The words were simple. "My dad protects people he's never met in countries far away, but nobody protected him in our driveway." Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, if you're someone who lies awake at 2 or 3 a.m., mind racing, unable to shut off, I know how frustrating that is. You're exhausted, but your brain just won't stop. And the worst part? The less you sleep, the worse it gets. Your energy crashes, your mood suffers, everything feels harder than it should. I struggled with this for years. Tried melatonin, white noise, warm milk, nothing worked long term. Then I found something called the 3-0-day uninterrupted sleep reset. It's a science-based program, no pills, no medication, that actually retrains your brain to sleep through the night, 7 to 8 hours, uninterrupted. Over 30 days, it rewires your sleep system. And once you're done, you keep the results. There's a maintenance plan so you don't slip back. Look, if you've tried everything and nothing sticks, this is different. Check the link in the description. Seriously, try it, and I'll catch you in the next story.